So to put our bassoon together, let's first start with the case. We're going to have to know how to open the case safely so the instrument doesn't pour out of it when we open. So this case has a case cover, and then there's another case within it, obviously. So the bigger half should be on the bottom. That's what you want resting on the floor. If they look about even, and this is just a case cover, but if they look about even, there are a few ways you can tell. Either the handle, if there's a handle attached, should be attached to just the bottom. That's not the case with this case cover. Or the logo should be on top because it's made to, when it's sitting upright, for that logo to be readable, advertising and all that. So let me unzip the case cover here. And I will say a case cover can be obviously put on backwards. So if it has a case cover, just make sure you also look at the actual case inside. So this case does not have a logo on it, but if we look at just the case, we can see that this is the bigger half and that the handle is clearly attached to the bigger half. And this is actually true of all instrument cases. We have a piccolo case here. This bottom half is the bigger half, so if I were to open this, the instrument's laying on the bottom. The trumpet case here, this is the bigger half. The handle is attached to the bigger half. There's a logo. The logo is on top, and it looks upside down, so that way when it's sitting on its side, you can read it. Here's a violin case. Bigger half is on bottom. In this case, the logo. In this case, the logo is on the side, so that way you can actually. It should be readable if you can read it. If it is a readable logo. Obviously, some logos are just symbols. So let's open the case. So on this case, we have 2 latches, but it's not uncommon to see 3 or 4. But I would say 2 is probably the most common. And that should just open up. Your case should be designed to where when you open this latch part, that it won't just fall to the floor. I think the really nice quality cases like this one, they don't have like straps holding it that way. It's designed in the hinge to stop like that, which I really like. Before we put it together, I'm going to talk about each of the joints and what they're called, as well as showing you how to pick them up and get them out of the case. So let's start with what's going to be the foundation of our instrument, this joint right here. So this is called the boot, or this is also called the double joint. And the way I'm going to get this out of the case is I kind of like to think about grabbing it from 4 corners. So I slip my right hand, and this can vary a little bit from case to case. But I like to grab it from the corners, and I start on the right side, and I kind of get there, and then I bring my hand over here, get it on the corners, and then I just pull it out just like that. I'm not putting any unnecessary pressure on any joints or anything. It's fairly safe to hold it like this. Anytime you pick up any part of the bassoon, you want these long rods, and then there's posts. Those are places you want to avoid having the ends of your fingers on or be pinching by. You want to make sure that you're holding it by either the flat bore of the instrument, or if it does have to rest on a key, that it's resting on a key and interacting with that key the way it should. So for instance, let's say I was holding it by this with my thumb. That's okay because that key is meant to go down. So I'm not bending it in a weird direction that it's not meant to. I'm not holding it like from the side pushing that way or anything like that. Cool. So this is, once again, the boot or double joint. When you're putting it together, you're going to see that there's 2 holes in this, which is why it's called the double joint. You're going to want this smaller hole to the right, and this hook right here should be facing towards you as you're putting it together. And then when you're putting it together, you're going to be holding it from the top with your right hand. And I actually, with my ring finger here, I push on this key, which is fine. Or you can just avoid it altogether and just wrap your hand a little further around it. You just want to make sure the ends of your fingers aren't pushing on any rods or post. But I find it pretty comfortable to have my thumb putting pressure here on the side and then for my fingers to just be kind of wrapped around. And they're wrapping around this, they're not actually pushing on it. It's okay if they touch a little bit, you just don't want to be pushing into that or anything. And so I hold it just like that. The next joint we're going to talk about is this second longest one here. This is called the wing joint or tenor joint, and the way we're going to get this out is, once again, I like to just start from the top here. I reach my fingers in, probably just once, just fine. I kind of lift it out a little bit, and I get my hand underneath it, and as I lift the joint up, you can bring your right hand to support it underneath. But this is the tenor joint or wing joint. Not quite sure why it's called the wing joint, maybe because this little concave section kind of makes it look a little bit like a wing. But it's called the tenor joint because this is the joint responsible for our tenor register. So when we're putting it together, the side we really should be seeing is right here with the keys. On the other side, we have tone holes. And right here you might actually have a key if it's a short reach model bassoon. But otherwise there should be tone holes here. And you might have a lot more fancy keys around the tone holes, but there should be these 3 tone holes, possibly just 2 with another key down here. But you want to be looking at these keys. This key right here, you might not have that on your bassoon. Certain models don't have this high D key. And then right here you also might see what looks like another key. It's actually called a whisper key lock. But either way, you want to be looking for keys that resemble something like this. So the way I like to hold this when I'm putting it together, you're going to be holding the boot with your right hand. So I like to pull it out of the case with just my left hand. I start at the top, wrap my fingers around, I pull it up, and then I'm going to put my right hand underneath just to support it for the camera angle. Then I slide. What I end up doing is I set this joint on my leg to rest, but I can't get a good camera angle of that right now. But after I hold it from the top, I'm going to slide my hand down, and then I want my palm to rest in this inner section, this very concave section here. My palm rests in that, and my fingers go around, and once again, my fingers aren't, they might be making a little bit of contact with this, but they're not pushing into it. And then I hold it just like this. And that's how you're going to hold it for when you're putting the instrument together. This joint right here, this very long one, is called the long joint or bass joint, as in B-A-S-S, because it's responsible for our bass notes, our lower notes. So once again, I like to think of just like the corners of this to pull it right out. Once again, just make sure your fingers aren't pushing into any sort of rods, or if they're touching a key, that it's going in the direction the key wants to naturally go. So once again, when I hold this, I do it with just my left hand, because our right hand is going to be holding what we've already put together. But you're just going to use just your left hand to pull it out from the top. And then I like my thumb to push on this low B key here, this top key here. I like my thumb to push on it, and my palm rests right here. And then my fingers just wrap around. And then you should have some type of body lock here. Your fingers should be able to go around that pretty easy. Or you might have a body lock mechanism here, which I'll talk about as we're putting the instrument together. Our last main part of the bassoon is right here, and this is called the bell. This is a German style bell. You can tell because of the style of ring on this, it goes completely around. It's a little bigger. You might have a French style bell where this ring is more embedded into the instrument. So when I hold this, I like to, once again, you're going to be holding it with just the left hand, but you want your thumb pushing on this key and then your fingers wrap around. There's really not much on this joint that you can damage. There's just the one key. You might have well, it's very unlikely, but you might have a type of bassoon with what's called a gentleman cut, which means from about here up, this part is a separate joint, or it's combined with the bell all together. I think it's unlikely that you have that. Those tend to be on very expensive model bassoons. But who knows, you might have ended up with something like that. And that's called a gentleman's cut. It allows the case to be a little less wide, so it's a little more compact. So that's why you might see a bassoon like that. But I will say it does look odd to me because I'm used to seeing bassoons look like this. Also, taking the bell out of the case, once again, if you're doing it with just your left hand, because your right hand's going to be holding the instrument, you should be able to just kind of reach your fingers in and grab it out. And then you can put your thumb right on that. So let's start putting the instrument together. So we're going to start with our boot joint. Where the four corners here, you can just grab it out. I generally lift the bottom part out first, and then grab by those corners. And then I'm going to be holding it up top. This smaller hole here should be facing towards you, and you want the bigger hole to the left. And I like to set it on, generally when I put it together, I put it on my right leg, but if you're on a chair, you can sit on the chair, or if you're not comfortable doing that, you can hold it on the floor, but your right hand is going to be holding it on top. And I like to use a seat strap that clips on. It's actually a laptop strap, but I'm going to go ahead and put that on now. And I just have a little key ring on the bottom here. And I just like to have that clipped on. So we're going to be using our right hand to hold the instrument. I'm going to just hold it on my leg here. So I'm going to hold it up with my right hand. I have it on my right leg, but once again, you can have it on the chair or the floor. So then we're going to go on to the wing joint. Grab it by the top. We're grabbing it with our left hand. I set it to balance it on my leg. I slide my hand down, and then my palm is in that curve. And I can hold it very comfortably. None of my fingers are resting on any of the rods, just resting on the bore. And then I'm going to take it. The key should be facing towards you. You want the tone holes facing out. It's going to go in that right joint, so it's smaller of the circles. And then I'm just going to slightly, gently twist it while applying some slight downward pressure. It should end up looking like that. So it's important to note that this key here, if you're doing it wrong, you can damage this key. So for instance, let's say you had that backwards, you could end up pushing that into like the instrument itself. You don't want to break this key right here. I got another lining there. So just be careful of that. If you're doing it what I say, that shouldn't happen. All right, let's move on to the long joint. So once again, you're using your right hand to hold the instrument. You're going to use your left hand to grab the long joint out of the case. And then I like to hold it from the top with my thumb on the low D key. And then we're going to, let's give it a good angle of this. You can actually rest it on the floor so you can kind of see the top. So we're going to aim this bottom tenon. We're going to get it into that bigger hole that's on the left. Once again, you want the keys facing towards you. And then just slight twist and gentle downward pressure. If at any point you feel like you have to really strong arm it to get the instrument to go into itself, it's an indication that you need to apply some cork grease. If it's cork, like this one is, it needs cork grease. If it's string, it needs wax. You do not put cork grease on the string. The string will absorb the cork grease and then it'll swell, and that can actually make the joint stuck. So you make sure that if it's cork grease. If it's string, it's wax. So then on my bassoon here, I have what's called a body lock. So we have our body lock at the top here, and you should hear it click into place. There's a hole at the top of our tenor joint or wing joint that the lock goes into, and this just stabilizes it so it doesn't move around as we're playing. Now you might have a different style lock, and you can tell that this bassoon at one point had that type of style lock, where essentially there's a device here that has probably little squares and holes in it, and then same thing over here, little squares, little holes, and then they'll intertwine with each other, and then you drop a pin. That's an older style lock, but you might have a bassoon with that. I would say this type of lock here, though, this type of body lock is the most common that you'll see now. And at this point, if I was still up on my leg, once I have the long joint and tender joint in, I actually slide it down to the floor very gently. And then I hold it like that. At this point, it's like super easy to balance. You shouldn't have to be putting a lot of hand pressure or anything like that to hold it up. So even if your fingers are making contact with like the rods or anything, as long as you're not squeezing them, you really shouldn't be doing any damage to the instrument. And then let's move on to the bell. And I will say for the bell, if you want to switch to holding the instrument with your left hand and grab it with your right hand, that's fine. Or if you want to hold the instrument with your right hand, grab it with your left hand, that's fine. Just because of my positioning right now, I'm just going to grab this with my right hand. And then the same thing when we hold this, we just want to push this key down. And then there's a little key right here that it will go over. Let me just show this camera too. This little key right here, we want this bottom part, that moving part right there, to go over. So that's why we hold this key down when we put this joint on. And we're just going to put it on just like that. And you can twist if you need to, but I find just some gentle downward pressure is really all it needs. So the last part we have is our bocal. I actually use a gig bag most of the time, so I actually have a bocal case for my bocals. And I really don't like how, in the case in here, it's designed to hold the bocal. When you grab the bocal, you just want to make sure that you are holding it by the curved part and not by the end where you would attach the reed. Just because if you're holding it by that, just the way momentum and force works, it's really easy to damage the bocal if you're holding it by this part and applying any type of pressure. So you just want to hold it by the curve because it's just going to be a little more safe there. And then this goes into the top, goes into this little hole right here. So the only thing you want to keep in mind is there's a little vent hole on the bocal. You don't want it to bump into the, hope this will focus. You don't want it to bump into this body lock here. So you just want to be careful that you obviously don't want to damage your bocal. And then it just goes right in top. And really, it should go most of the way on its own, and then I find just very gentle pressure and twisting it should get the rest of the way. You do want the bocal to go all the way in. It is not a tuning slide. It is meant to go all the way in. If you're out of tune, there's other reasons you're out of tune, but there's no tuning slides on bassoons. We don't do that. Our reed has to be made to play in tune, and we have to be on the appropriate length vocal. But yeah, we don't have tuning slides. Another part that's optional in bassoon is the hand rest, or sometimes called a crutch. So if we look at the side of the bassoon here, we can see this little small tube kind of sticking off, and there's a screw in the top of it. It should look something like that. Maybe the screw on your particular bassoon is gone, maybe it fell out. So maybe you just have this little tube sticking out, but that's for the hand rest. So all you have to do is just unscrew that screw a little bit. I don't do it all the way, and then you're gonna put your crutch in, and you'll probably feel like that screw still in the way. So then keep unscrewing it till it slides all the way in, just like so, and then I like to tighten it, and then that's your hand rest. You can experiment with which way is more comfortable for you. I think I have it with the big side on top. But I think this is actually technically the way, like if you were to look in a textbook, I think textbooks tell you to do it this way, but I think I actually do it the opposite of that. It doesn't really matter. There are also literally thousands of different hand rest sizes and stuff, so experiment with what's most comfortable for you. Or maybe you don't even need one. When I first got this bassoon, it actually didn't have a spot for the hand rest, because I assumed whoever had it before that even this was too big and it actually got in the way of their hand. But that is not the case for me, so just experiment with, see what's most comfortable for you. Things to keep in mind as you're putting it together, maybe as you're looking at any of these joints, and I think this is super common on Fox model instruments. Sometimes this long joint really doesn't like to sit all the way down. I don't know why that is. I think it's maybe because at some point maybe it's a string tenon, and I think you can get someone put grease on it so that string is swollen a little bit, so it doesn't want to go all the way down. If there's a little gap there, it's okay. Don't force it. The amount of difference it's going to make on the overall tuning, it should be somewhat insignificant. And you don't want to force it and break anything, or force it and get it stuck or anything like that. So if there's little gaps there, it's fine. Just let the gap be there. If it really bothers you, then I would just say send your bassoon into a technician, but it's not something to try to force down. You can even try maybe cleaning out. Maybe there's clumps of dirt or something that's preventing it, but that'd be kind of gross if there was clumps of dirt in your bassoon big enough to do that. So anyway, so that's how you put the bassoon together. So start with your boot joint. Go ahead and put at least for me, I go ahead and put the seat strap on because mine clips on. Hold with right hand. Tenor joint or wing joint. Slide hand down into that little crevice. Key should be facing towards you, into the smaller hole. Little twist, little downward pressure. And on certain model instruments, you'll actually have lines here that tell you where to line up the joints, which are really nice. But otherwise, I actually like it to be just a little more to the left. Like if I was turning it clockwise, I like to be turned just a little more to the left. Then it would be like a perfect circle there. Then I go to the bass joint or long joint. I can hold it at the top. Slide it in to the bigger hole. And then I like to slide it down to the floor. And then I'm going to go ahead and put the body lock on. You should hear it click. And then it doesn't matter which hand at this point. Hold it. And I like to have it in between my legs so my legs can catch it if something weird happens. Unbell. Hit the key. Just gentle downward pressure. Then go on to the vocal. Hold by the curved part. And it should really just slide in. And then very light pressure and twisting should get it the rest of the way. Your vocal should not be hard to put in. If it is too hard to put in, it needs to be greased. If it's greased and still too hard to put on, it was unfortunately the cork is too big. So I would recommend having someone who's comfortable either sand the cork down or just sending it in and saying that the vocal needs to be fitted better. But hopefully that doesn't happen. But it really should not take any sort of amount of force to put the vocal in. So let's talk about how to take the instrument apart now, now that you've done whatever you were going to do, and how to safely put it back into the case. And if you didn't take a picture before you took it out of the case, how to figure out how it goes back in. So let's start with the vocal. Once again, you're going to hold it by the curved part, gentle twist, and just gentle upward pressure, and it should come right out. Now, depending on your bassoon case, and I don't particularly like this cases, your vocal might actually sit on like the bottom, and then there might be some like hooks that kind of slide over it. So you want to make sure if that is your case that your vocal goes in first. But otherwise, in this particular case, there's actually a spot here for it to slide into. And I actually like to pull on it just a little bit, just to make sure that it doesn't hurt the whisper keynote. But once again, I actually really don't like this case, so I'm not going to leave my vocal in that. I have just a vocal case that it just slides right into, and then it velcros over. So then I like to take apart the bell and the long joint at the same time. So the way I do this is I take my left hand, and I'm going to put my left hand over this key, the palm over this key. My thumb is going to kind of be touching the bell, and then my fingers just wrap around. And then my right hand is wrapped around the tenon of the boot. And it's actually pushing this key here, which would be our C-sharp trophy. Excuse me. So then what I like to do is I kind of have it a little bit flatter. I guess you could lay it across completely flat. I lay it flat across my lap, and then I grip here. I apply a little bit of pressure to that low B key, and then I twist and pull it out. And then you want to make sure too that your lock, and obviously it just depends on your lock, but that you go ahead and put your lock back to that top position, or if there was a pin there, that when you were doing that you pulled the pin out, because obviously it's not the greatest thing to pull that out while it's still in. Now that I have these off together, I like to put my right hand, it's going to wrap around this guard that goes over the low D key. When my thumb goes over it, my palm kind of hits that guard, my fingers go over, and then I still hit this key, you don't really have to, and then I just twist it apart, and it comes apart super easy. And then we're going to set the long joint where it goes, and we're going to set the bell where it goes in the case. So to know where to put the bell, there should be a little line, so it should always be at this part of the case that's closest to you for the bell. And there should be a little line indicating which side the ring goes on. So sometimes you might have cases where it's like this, and sometimes you might have cases where it's like this. In this case, the bell goes here because there's a little line for the bell to fit into. And with the long joint, what you're wanting to look for is at the end here is the way the long joint and tenor joint will sit in the case. It should look like how it is when it's put together properly. So you should be able to see a bigger spot for the long joint tenon and a smaller spot for the wing joint tenon, and they should be right next to each other. So that's how you should be able to tell where the long joint goes. Cool. So then now we have our boot and our wing joint still together. So same thing, I like to put my palm right in that concave spot, wrap my fingers around, grip it a little bit. Same thing with my right hand over the tenon, and I like to push the C-sharp key down with my ring finger. And then, or actually I guess it's my middle finger, isn't it? Anyway, and then I just twist and pull it out. And I like to do lots of twisting motions over applying more force, just because it's safer. And then this, once again, you just don't want to hold it by anything that is like a rod where you're applying pressure to it, but then this should go right next to the long joint. And it should resemble, this should look exactly like what the instrument looks like when it's put together. Then I'm going to go ahead and take off my seat strap. And because I use a little keyring here, I like to make sure it's folded in. And the way you know for where the boot goes, if you look in the case here, and I might need to, can I turn the light on? Oh, I can. The way you can tell is if you look closer into the case, you can kind of tell indentions. You should see a pretty clear indentation for where the ring on the boot joint is supposed to insert into. So I can see that pretty distinct line right here, so I know that's where the ring joint is supposed to, the double joint or boot is supposed to go, and that the ring is supposed to be face down into that. And so I'm just going to set this in. I like to put like a little bit of pressure too on the top just to make sure it's going down all the way. Another thing here is on the bassoon we have a hand rest portion, and you can see in the case here that there's a little bit of a divot here making room for this joint. That's where we would put our hand rest in.